I am not the kind of person who does things halfway. When I decide to build something, I build it right, or I don't build it at all. So when I finally saved enough to put in a backyard pool, I didn't settle for some plastic shell you'd find at a weekend garage sale. I poured everything into it. Custom mosaic tiles, underwater lighting that shifts from blue to gold at dusk, and a small waterfall that makes the whole yard feel like a private resort. It took years of discipline, sacrifice, and saying no to a lot of things I wanted, so I could have one thing I truly deserved. I'm not selfish, though. I'm the kind of neighbor who waves first and means it. I even allowed one family on the block to use the pool occasionally, with rules, with respect, and with trust. That small act of kindness was the worst mistake I made on this street. Every neighborhood has one. You know exactly who I'm talking about before I even finish the description. Ours was named Deborah. She wasn't on the HOA board, let me be clear about that. But she carried herself as if she had personally founded the entire subdivision. Matching athleisure sets every single day, a clipboard she referenced like it contained classified information, and 3 kids who moved through the world as though consequence was something that happened to other people. Deborah had appointed herself the unofficial Community Standards Officer, which is a title she invented, enforced aggressively, and that absolutely no one asked for. She was the kind of woman who knocked on your door to tell you your welcome mat was slightly off-center. The first time she brought up my pool, it was casual. Calculated casual. We were both checking our mail, and she mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that her kids would absolutely love to take a dip sometime. I smiled, kept it warm, and told her the pool was private. She nodded slowly, tilted her head just a fraction and said, "Of course, totally understand." But her eyes didn't say that. Her eyes said something else entirely. There was a stillness behind them, the kind of stillness that isn't peace, it's patience. The patience of someone already planning their next move while you're still responding to the first one. That smile was the kind that says, "This isn't over," in 17 different languages. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and tell me if you've ever met a Deborah. Deborah didn't explode right away. That's what made her dangerous. People who blow up immediately are easy to handle. You document it, you report it, you move on. But Deborah operated on a slower frequency. She started with texts. Friendly ones at first, asking again about the pool, framing it differently each time, as a new angle might finally crack me open. Then came the physical appearances. Showing up at my fence on a Saturday afternoon with all 3 kids already in swimwear, towels draped over their shoulders, like the decision had already been made and I just hadn't been informed yet. Each time, I held my ground. Politely, clearly, without apology. That's when she changed the game entirely. I noticed it first at the mailbox. Neighbors who used to wave freely were suddenly giving me these slightly uncertain looks. Not unfriendly, but cautious. Like they'd heard something and weren't sure what to do with it. I pulled one of them aside, a quiet older gentleman named Frank who had never once involved himself in street politics. He hesitated, then told me Deborah had been making her rounds, casually mentioning that my pool had possible safety issues and that she was concerned for the children in the neighborhood. No facts, no evidence, just whispers dressed up as concern. I went straight home and pulled every document I had. Construction permits, chemical maintenance logs, filtration inspection records, water quality tests. Everything was immaculate, dated, and filed. My pool was cleaner than Deborah's reputation. I sent her one message, calm, direct, and final. "Please stop discussing my property with neighbors. This conversation is over." I set my phone down and waited. 3 minutes later, her reply came through. 3 words. "We'll see about that." And just like that, the gloves were off. I want you to picture a perfect Saturday morning. Coffee brewing, sunlight cutting clean across the backyard, the waterfall doing exactly what it was built to do, creating peace. That was my morning, right up until the knock at the front door. 2 code enforcement officers stood on my porch, clipboards in hand, expressions professionally unreadable. Someone had filed a formal complaint against my property. The allegations were specific and serious. Improper drainage, illegal chemical disposal, and a claim that my pool had been constructed without a valid permit. I knew exactly who had made that call before either officer finished their second sentence. I didn't panic. I didn't argue. I simply opened the door wider and told them to inspect everything they needed to. Because that's what you do when you have nothing to hide. You let the truth do the talking for you. They spent the better part of an hour out there. pH levels, drainage flow, filtration capacity, chemical storage, permit verification numbers. Every single item on their checklist received a passing mark. One officer actually paused at my filtration system and said, quietly and almost reluctantly, that it was one of the cleanest setups he'd seen on a residential property. I thanked him and walked them back to the gate. As they left, I spotted Deborah across the street, pretending to tend to a flower bed with the focused intensity of someone who is absolutely not gardening. One of the officers glanced in her direction. No words were exchanged, but the look said everything. The only thing leaking on my property that day was Deborah's credibility. I thought perhaps that would be enough. That the failure of her own complaint would finally make her reconsider. 1 week later, a second complaint landed. Different wording, same desperation, same signature energy. She wasn't done, not even close. The second complaint was the moment everything shifted for me. Not emotionally, I was past emotion at this point. It shifted strategically. Because there's a certain kind of person who mistakes your patience for weakness, your silence for surrender, and your kindness for something they can keep pulling at until it unravels. Deborah had mistaken all three. That stops the moment you stop playing defense and start playing chess. I ordered 2 additional security cameras that same evening. Wide angle, weatherproof, covering every inch of fence line, and a clean sight line down the sidewalk in both directions. Then I sat down and drafted a formal harassment complaint. Not to some neighborhood group chat, but to the actual HOA board. The real one. I documented every text, every fence appearance, every rumor traced back to her, and both code enforcement visits, with dates, times, and officer badge numbers attached. The board chair was a retired civil engineer named Mr. Paxton. Quiet man, measured, someone who had clearly seen his share of neighborhood theatrics. He reviewed the file I submitted, looked up at me once, and said with the weight of a man choosing his words carefully, "This is embarrassing." He wasn't talking about me. I also sent a cease and desist letter via certified mail, signature required, and posted 2 laminated signs on my gate. No trespassing, recording in progress. Deborah wanted a war. I gave her a paper trail. And paper trails, unlike feelings, hold up in every room that matters. The certified mail was delivered on a Tuesday. I know this because my camera captured the exact moment the postal worker handed Deborah that envelope, watched her read the return address, and saw her face shift from curiosity to something that looked like a circuit breaker tripping behind her eyes. I gave her 24 hours to process it. She used those 24 hours to detonate instead. She arrived at my gate on a Wednesday afternoon with all 3 kids trailing behind her like reluctant witnesses to a crime she was about to commit in broad daylight. I was inside. I stayed inside. I watched the entire thing unfold on my phone screen through the security feed with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing every single second is being recorded in crisp, time-stamped detail. She didn't knock. She didn't ring the bell. She just started talking. Loudly, then louder, then at a volume that I'm fairly certain rattled someone's wind chimes 2 houses down. The accusations came in no particular order. I was antisocial. I was targeting her family specifically. I had single-handedly poisoned the culture of the neighborhood by refusing to share what she had decided. Somewhere in the architecture of her own reasoning was a community resource. Her own kids stood slightly behind her, shifting their weight from foot to foot, exchanging the kind of glances that children exchange when they instinctively understand that the adult in front of them has crossed a line. Even they knew. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the volume on my security system and picked up my phone to call the non-emergency police line. I stated clearly that I had a trespasser at my gate making verbal threats, and I sent the live camera footage directly from my app before I even finished the sentence. 2 officers arrived in minutes. They had already reviewed the footage before stepping out of the car. Deborah tried to explain her perspective. They had no interest in her perspective. They had video. After 2 ignored warnings, she was detained and escorted away from my property while her children watched in silence. Every single second of it captured in 4K resolution, backed up to the cloud, time-stamped down to the second. I didn't go outside once. The HOA board met the following Thursday. I wasn't required to attend, but Mr. Paxton called me afterward with the kind of quiet satisfaction in his voice that people reserve for moments when order has finally been restored. Deborah had been issued a formal community conduct warning, On record, in writing, with consequences attached should anything similar occur again. Several neighbors reached out to me in the days that followed. Privately, through texts, through quick conversations at the mailbox. The message was consistent. They never believed her. They just hadn't said anything. I appreciated the honesty more than the apology. I had the pool serviced the following weekend. New lounge chairs, upgraded lighting, and a small addition to the waterfall that I had been putting off for months. I sat beside it that Sunday evening with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Genuine, uninterrupted quiet. No complaints, no cameras to check, no texts with hidden meanings. Just water, light, and the sound of something I built with my own discipline reflecting the last of the day's sun back at me. My pool is still the most beautiful thing on this street. Deborah's lawn, on the other hand, well, let's just say karma waters its own garden. If any of this felt familiar, drop your story in the comments. Like and subscribe for more. You already know why.